I didn't cry when he said it. I stopped breathing instead. The chandelier above us shimmered like 1,000 tiny lies, each crystal reflecting the moment my life cracked in half as my fiancé, my almost husband, smiled at another woman like I had already been erased. The ballroom smelled like expensive champagne and roses, the kind you only see in places where people pretend everything is perfect, and I stood there in a white dress that suddenly felt like a costume for a role I no longer had. "Let's not drag this out," Daniel said, his voice smooth, practiced, like he'd rehearsed this betrayal in a mirror, his hand resting casually on her waist, fingers spread like he owned something new now. Laughter flickered through the crowd, not loud, not cruel, just enough to make it worse, just enough to remind me that humiliation doesn't need volume to echo. I could feel every eye on me, measuring, judging, waiting for me to break. But I didn't. Not yet. My fingers curled slightly at my sides, nails pressing into my palms just to remind myself I was still here, still standing, even if everything else had already collapsed. "You were convenient," he added, softer this time, as if that made it kinder, as if that softened the fact that 5 years of my life had just been reduced to something disposable. Convenient. The word hit harder than anything else, because it wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was small, and final, and real. Around us, people shifted, glasses clinked, someone whispered, someone else lifted their phone just slightly too high, capturing the moment like it was entertainment instead of someone's entire world ending in real time. I could feel heat rising behind my eyes, but I refused to let it fall, refused to give them the satisfaction of watching me collapse into something fragile. "Not here. Not like this. Say something," Daniel pressed, tilting his head, almost amused, like he was waiting for a reaction, like I was still part of his performance. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out, just air, thin and useless, like my voice had decided to leave before I could. And that's when I noticed it, the silence that didn't belong. It wasn't complete, not the kind that stops a room entirely, but it shifted, subtle, like the atmosphere itself had taken a step back. Conversations dimmed, laughter stalled mid-breath. And I felt it before I saw him. Presence. Heavy, controlled, deliberate. Footsteps. Not rushed, not hesitant, but measured, like every inch of space already belonged to him, and he was simply reminding the room of that fact. I turned slightly, just enough, and there he was. A man in a black suit that fit like it had been made for war rather than fashion. Dark hair swept back, eyes steady and unreadable, walking straight toward us like the rest of the world had become background noise. No one stopped him. No one even tried. People moved without realizing they were moving, creating space around him like instinct was smarter than thought. My heart, which had been numb just seconds ago, suddenly remembered how to beat. And it beat harder, faster, not from fear exactly, but from something I couldn't name yet. He didn't look at Daniel first. He looked at me. Not like the others had. No pity, no curiosity, no quiet judgment. Just focus, sharp and clear, like he was seeing something no one else in the room had bothered to notice. Then his gaze dropped, just briefly, to the ring on my finger. The one Daniel had given me. The one that suddenly felt heavier than anything I'd ever worn. "Take it off," Daniel said suddenly, irritation creeping into his voice now, as if he needed to regain control of a moment that was slipping through his fingers. My hand didn't move. Not because I wanted to keep it, but because I didn't want to obey him. Not anymore. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face, and before I could react, he reached forward, sliding the ring from my finger with a sharp, decisive motion, like he was correcting a mistake. The cold air hit my skin instantly, leaving behind a hollow space that felt louder than the entire room. He didn't even look at it. He just let it drop. The small metallic sound as it hit the marble floor echoed far more than it should have, sharp and final, like a period at the end of something I hadn't agreed to end. And for a second, no one moved. Then the man in black stepped forward, bending slightly, picking up the ring between his fingers. Not rushed, not hesitant, just precise. He turned it once, studying it like it meant something more than what it was, then lifted his gaze back to me. My breath caught. Not because of what he was doing, but because of how calmly he was doing it, like none of this was unusual to him, like stepping into someone else's chaos was just another part of his day. He walked closer, closing the distance between us until I could feel the subtle warmth of his presence, the faint scent of something expensive and understated, something that didn't try too hard to impress because it didn't need to. Daniel shifted beside me, suddenly less certain, his confidence cracking just enough to notice. "This doesn't concern you," he said, trying to sound firm, but it came out thinner than before. The man didn't even look at him. Not yet. His attention stayed on me, steady, unwavering, like the rest of the room had disappeared entirely. Then, with a small, almost dismissive motion, he let Daniel's ring fall back to the floor. Not thrown, not dropped carelessly, just released, as if it no longer held any value worth keeping. My pulse jumped. Something about that simple act, so quiet, so controlled, felt louder than anything Daniel had said all night. The man reached into his jacket, slow enough for everyone to see, deliberate enough to make it impossible to ignore, and when he pulled his hand back out, there was another ring. Different, sleeker, heavier, not flashy, but undeniable. He took my hand before I could process it, his touch firm but not rough, steady like he knew exactly what he was doing and had no intention of asking permission. The room seemed to lean in, every breath held, every eye locked on the moment as it unfolded. "You don't get to decide her worth," he said finally, his voice low, controlled, carrying through the silence without needing to rise. It wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. It landed anyway, cutting clean through everything Daniel had tried to build. Then he slid the ring onto my finger. And just like that, everything changed. The ring felt heavier than it should have, like it carried weight far beyond gold, pressing gently against my skin as if reminding me that something irreversible had just happened. My breath came back in fragments, uneven, uncertain, while the room slowly exhaled around us, the silence cracking into whispers that spread like ripples across water. No one laughed now. No one recorded. No one moved too quickly. It was as if the entire ballroom had recalibrated itself around the man standing beside me. Daniel's voice came out sharper this time, forced, trying to reclaim ground that had already disappeared beneath him. "You cannot just walk in here and do this," he said, but there was hesitation underneath it, something that had not been there a minute ago. The man finally turned his head, just slightly, his gaze shifting to Daniel with the kind of calm that made the air feel tighter instead of lighter. He did not raise his voice. He did not step closer. He did not need to. "I already did," he replied, and the simplicity of it landed harder than any argument could have. Daniel swallowed, his confidence flickering like a faulty light, and for the first time since the night began, he looked unsure of himself. I stood there between them, my pulse still racing, my mind trying to catch up with everything that had just unfolded. The ring on my finger was real. The hand that had placed it there was still warm against mine. And somehow, impossibly, I was no longer the center of humiliation. I was something else now. Something no one in this room knew how to respond to. "Who do you think you are?" Daniel pushed, but it sounded weaker now, like a question he was not entirely certain he wanted answered. The man's expression did not change. "Someone who does not repeat himself," he said, and that was it. No explanation. No introduction. Just a boundary drawn so cleanly that no one dared step over it. I felt my fingers twitch slightly in his hold, and only then did he release my hand, slowly, deliberately, as if making sure I was steady before letting go. The absence of his touch was immediate, noticeable, like the room had suddenly dropped a few degrees. My heart stumbled over itself, confused by the shift. I should have stepped back. I should have said something. I should have demanded answers. But I did none of those things. Instead, I looked down at the ring again, watching the way the light caught its surface, how it fit perfectly, as if it had always belonged there. "This is insane," I whispered, more to myself than anyone else, but he heard it anyway. Of course he did. "No," he said quietly, his voice lowering. Just enough that only I could hear it now. "What happened before this was insane." I looked up at him then, really looked this time, searching for something that made sense, something that explained why a stranger would step into my life at its worst possible moment and rewrite it in front of an audience that had just watched me fall apart. His eyes held mine, steady, unreadable, but not cold, not empty. There was something else there. Intention. Daniel laughed then, a short, strained sound that did not carry the same confidence as before. "You think this changes anything?" he said, glancing around the room like he was trying to gather support that no longer existed. No one answered. No one agreed. People avoided his eyes now, shifting subtly, distancing themselves from a narrative that no longer benefited them. I felt it too. The shift. The invisible line that had been drawn, separating what had been from what was now. It changes everything, the man beside me said, and this time, there was no room for interpretation. Daniel opened his mouth again, but whatever he was about to say never came out. Instead, he stepped back, just one step, but it was enough. Enough to signal what everyone else had already understood. He was no longer in control of this moment. He turned away first, pulling the woman beside him with him, his exit quick, abrupt, like he needed to leave before the weight of the room pressed down any further. And just like that, the person who had dismantled my world minutes ago became background noise, disappearing into a crowd that no longer revolved around him. I did not feel satisfaction. I did not feel victory. I felt something quieter, something steadier, like I had just been pulled out of something I did not know how to survive on my own. The room slowly came back to life, but differently now. Softer, more cautious. People spoke in lower tones, glancing at me, then at him, then away again. I could feel the questions forming, the curiosity, the speculation, but no one dared approach. Not yet. I turned back to him, my voice finally finding its way back to me. You just made a very public decision for someone you do not know. I said, my words careful, measured, because if I did not stay grounded, I was going to lose myself in everything that had just happened. His gaze did not waver. I know enough, he replied. That was not an answer. Not really. My brows drew together slightly. That is not how this works, I said, shaking my head just once. You do not just. I gestured faintly to my hand, to the ring, to the entire situation that felt unreal. Do this. A faint shift crossed his expression, something almost like recognition, as if he understood the line I was trying to draw even if he had no intention of stepping behind it. Most people do not, he agreed. I am not most people. The way he said it was not arrogant. It was factual, simple, unavoidable. I exhaled slowly, trying to steady myself, trying to regain some sense of control in a situation that had slipped far beyond anything I could have predicted. Then tell me your name, I said, because if I was going to stand here wearing his ring, I needed at least that much reality to hold on to. There was a brief pause. Not hesitation. Consideration. Then, finally, he spoke. Luca, he said. Just Luca. No last name. No explanation. But the way the name settled in the air, the way it seemed to shift the energy around us even further, told me it carried more weight than he was willing to say out loud. I nodded once, absorbing it, even if I did not fully understand it. Ava, I replied, my voice steadier now, reclaiming a piece of myself in the exchange. His gaze softened, just barely, at the sound of it. I know, he said, and something in my chest tightened instantly, because that was not something I had told him. My mind raced, trying to piece together what that meant, how that was possible, why this night felt less like coincidence and more like something that had been set in motion long before I walked into this room. I stared at him, searching for answers he had not given, and he held my gaze like he was waiting for me to ask the right question. But I did not know what that question was yet. All I knew was that nothing about this was random, and whatever I had just stepped into was not going to let me walk away easily. You knew my name. The words left my mouth before I could stop them, quiet but sharp enough to cut through the space between us. And for a moment, everything else faded again. The music, the whispers, the soft clink of glasses returning to life around the room. None of it mattered compared to the way Luca looked at me like this had always been inevitable. He did not answer immediately. He did not look surprised either. He simply studied me, as if measuring how much I was ready to hear and how much I was not. That silence stretched, not uncomfortable, but deliberate, like he understood the weight of timing better than anyone I had ever met. I told you, he said finally, his voice calm, steady, controlled. I know enough. It was the same phrase, but it landed differently now, heavier, more intentional, like it carried meaning I had not yet unlocked. My fingers curled slightly, instinctively brushing against the ring again, grounding myself in something real, while everything else felt uncertain. That is not enough for me. I replied, my voice stronger this time, steadier, because if I let myself drift, I would lose control of this moment entirely. You walked into my life and changed it in under 60 seconds. I think I deserve more than vague answers. There was no anger in my tone, just truth, just the quiet insistence of someone who had already lost too much to accept half answers. Something shifted in his expression then, subtle, almost invisible, but it was there. Recognition, not of me, but of the boundary I was drawing. Fair, he said, and that single word carried more respect than anything Daniel had offered me in years. Around us, the room continued its slow return to normal, but it was not the same normal. People kept their distance, their conversations quieter, their attention drifting back to us in quick, cautious glances. It was as if an invisible perimeter had formed, one that no one dared cross without permission. Then start with something simple, I said, holding his gaze, refusing to look away first. How do you know my name? Another pause, shorter this time. Calculated. Because I pay attention, he said, but even as the words left him, I could tell that was not the whole truth. It was not a lie either. It was something in between. I let out a slow breath, shaking my head slightly. That is not an answer, I said, softer now, not pushing as hard, but not letting go either. He watched me for another second, then glanced briefly around the room, not nervously, not checking for danger, but assessing, always assessing, like he was aware of every variable at all times. When his gaze returned to me, it was sharper, more focused. This is not the place for that conversation, he said. Not a deflection, a decision. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to argue, to demand answers here and now, to force clarity out of a situation that refused to be simple. But another part of me, quieter, more instinctive, understood that he was right. This room, with its polished floors and curated smiles, was built for appearances, not truths. And whatever this was, it was not an appearance anymore. Then where is? I asked. He did not answer right away. Instead, he stepped slightly closer, just enough that his presence shifted again, not overwhelming, but undeniable, like gravity adjusting its pull. With me, he said. Simple, direct, dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the unknown. My heart skipped, just once, but it was enough. I could feel the weight of the choice forming before it was even spoken out loud. Stay here, in a room that had just watched me break, pretending I could walk away unchanged. Or step into something I did not understand with a man who clearly knew more than he was saying. You are asking me to leave with a stranger, I said, testing the words, feeling how they sounded, how real they were. No, he corrected, just as calmly as before. I am asking you to stop standing in a place that already decided what you were worth. That hit harder than anything else he had said, because it was true. This room had judged me before I even had the chance to speak. It had watched me fall and decided that was all I was. My gaze drifted briefly around the ballroom, taking in the familiar faces that now avoided mine. The people who had been smiling minutes ago and now pretended they had not seen anything at all. Then I looked back at him, at Luca, at the one person who had not looked away. And you think you know what I am worth? I asked quietly. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes sharpened, like the question mattered more than anything else I had asked. I think, he said slowly, choosing each word with precision, you have been standing in the wrong room for a very long time. Silence followed that. Not empty, not awkward, just full. Full of everything I had not said, everything I had accepted, everything I had ignored until it became impossible to ignore any longer. My chest rose and fell in a slow, steady rhythm as I processed that, as I felt something shift inside me, something that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with myself. The version of me that walked into this room would have stayed, would have tried to explain, would have tried to fix something that was never mine to fix. But that version of me had been left somewhere between the shattered glass and the ring on the floor. If I walk out of here with you, I said, my voice quieter now, but more certain, this does not mean I belong to you. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but close enough to recognize. Good, he said, because that is not what I am offering. That answer caught me off guard, just enough to make my breath hitch again. Not possession, not control, something else, something I did not have a word for yet. He extended his hand then, not grabbing, not pulling, just offering, like the choice was entirely mine. And for the first time that night, It actually felt that way. I looked at his hand, then at the ring, then back at his face. The room behind me felt smaller now, distant, like it had already started to fade. I took a breath, then another, and slowly, deliberately, I placed my hand in his. The contact was steady, grounding, not overwhelming, just enough to remind me that this was real, that I was choosing this. "Then let us go," he said. And this time, I did not hesitate. The night air felt colder than it should have. Or maybe it was just me finally noticing it as the doors of the ballroom closed behind us with a quiet, final click that sounded far louder in my head than it actually was. One step, then another. My heels tapped against the polished stone outside, each sound grounding me in a reality that still felt like it belonged to someone else. I did not look back. I thought I would. I thought there would be a moment where I would turn around, where I would second-guess everything, where I would wonder if I had just made a mistake I could not undo. But I did not, because something inside me had already decided. Luca did not rush me. He did not pull me forward or guide me with pressure. He simply walked beside me, matching my pace exactly, as if he understood that this was not about distance but about transition. The valet area stretched ahead, soft golden lights reflecting off sleek black cars lined up with quiet precision, engines humming low, controlled, waiting. The kind of waiting that did not feel passive. The kind that felt intentional. A man stepped forward the moment Luca came into view, his posture straightening instantly, his expression respectful without being exaggerated. "Sir," he said, his voice low, efficient, and he did not look at me directly, but I could feel that he was aware of me, cataloging, assessing, understanding that something had changed. Luca gave a small nod. Nothing dramatic, nothing unnecessary, but it was enough. Doors opened before we reached them. Not rushed, not chaotic, just expected. I slowed slightly as we approached the car, a black vehicle that seemed to absorb the light around it rather than reflect it, its presence quiet but undeniable. For the first time since I took his hand, uncertainty pressed in again, subtle but real. I stopped just short of the open door. My fingers tightened slightly around his, not pulling away, but not moving forward either. He noticed. Of course he did. "You can still walk away," he said, his voice calm, even, without pressure, without challenge. It was not a test. It was a truth. I looked at the car, then at him, then down at the ring again, catching the faint reflection of the streetlights in its surface. "If I walk away," I said slowly, choosing my words carefully, "I walk back into a life that already showed me exactly what it thinks of me." My gaze lifted back to his. "And if I get in that car, I step into something I do not understand." He did not interrupt. He did not fill the silence. He let it exist. Let me hear my own words. Let me feel the weight of them without trying to shape them. "Both are uncertain," he said finally, "but only one is honest." That settled something inside me. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to move. I exhaled, slow and steady, then stepped forward, releasing his hand just long enough to slide into the back seat. The interior was quiet, immaculate, the kind of space where every detail had been considered and nothing existed without purpose. The door closed behind me with a soft, solid sound that felt less like being shut in and more like being sealed away from everything I had just left behind. Luca followed a second later, taking the seat beside me, not too close, not distant either, just present. The car moved smoothly, almost silently, pulling away from the curb with a precision that mirrored everything else about him. I watched the building through the tinted window as it receded, its lights growing smaller, softer, less defined, until it became just another part of the city instead of the center of my world. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice quieter now, not fragile, but aware of the shift that had already happened. "Somewhere you can breathe," he replied. "Not an address, not a location, just a concept." I let that settle, leaning back slightly, feeling the steady motion of the car beneath me, the rhythm of it almost calming despite everything else. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The city lights passed in blurred streaks, reflections dancing across the glass, shifting patterns that felt almost hypnotic. My mind should have been racing. It should have been filled with questions, with doubts, with fear. But instead, there was a strange clarity, like everything unnecessary had been stripped away, leaving only what mattered. "You said I have been standing in the wrong room," I said after a while, breaking the silence, not looking at him yet, just letting the words exist between us. How long have you known that? A pause. Not long. Not drawn out. Just enough to mark the importance of the answer. Long enough, he said. I turned then, meeting his gaze directly. That is not specific, I replied, but there was less resistance in my tone now, more curiosity than defense. His expression did not shift, but something in his eyes softened slightly, like he recognized the change. You were not supposed to be there tonight, he said. The words landed differently than I expected. Not accusatory, not judgmental, just certain. I was engaged, I said, the word feeling unfamiliar now, like it belonged to someone else entirely. That is exactly my point, he replied. Silence followed that, heavier this time, filled with implications I could not fully unpack yet. My fingers brushed lightly against the ring again, tracing its edge, grounding myself in its presence. And what was I supposed to be? I asked quietly. This time, he did not answer right away. He looked out the window for a brief moment, the city lights reflecting in his eyes, then back at me. Someone who was not waiting to be chosen, he said. My breath caught slightly, not because of the words themselves, but because of how they landed, like they had been waiting for me to hear them for a long time. I looked away, back toward the window, watching the city move around us, but seeing something else entirely. Moments. Patterns. Choices I had made without realizing what they cost. And you think you can change that? I asked, not challenging, not fully believing, just wondering. His response came without hesitation. No, he said. I blinked, surprised. No. He shook his head once. I think you already are. That stopped everything. Completely. Because it was not a promise. It was not a claim. It was recognition. And somehow, that felt more dangerous than anything else. The car slowed then, turning smoothly onto a quieter street, the noise of the city fading into something softer, more distant. I straightened slightly, my awareness sharpening again as the environment shifted. We pulled up in front of a building that did not need to announce itself to be understood. Clean lines, subtle lighting, quiet security, the kind of place that did not ask for attention because it already had it. The car came to a stop. The engine hummed softly, then settled into silence. I did not move right away. Neither did he. This is where you decide what tonight means, Lucas said, his voice calm, steady, leaving the choice entirely in my hands again. I looked at the door, then at him, then at the ring, and for the first time, since everything began, I realized this was not about what he had done. It was about what I was going to do next. The silence inside the car did not feel empty. It felt like a line drawn in front of me, invisible but undeniable, waiting for me to decide whether I would cross it or turn back to something that no longer existed the way I thought it did. My hand rested lightly against the door handle, my fingers still, not frozen, just paused. I could feel Luca watching me, not impatient, not expectant, just present, like he understood that whatever I chose next had nothing to do with him forcing anything and everything to do with me finally choosing something for myself. I let out a slow breath, my chest rising and falling as I looked at the reflection of my own hand in the window, the ring catching the soft light from outside, steady, real, unignorable. If I walk out, I said quietly, more to myself than to him, I do not walk back into who I was. The words settled between us, not fragile, not uncertain, just honest. Good, Luca replied, his voice low, almost a murmur, like he was acknowledging something rather than influencing it. I turned the handle. The door opened with a soft sound, and the air outside met me again, cooler now, calmer, carrying none of the weight that had filled the ballroom earlier. I stepped out slowly, my heels touching the pavement with a different kind of certainty this time, not perfect, not fearless, but real. The building in front of me stood tall without needing to prove anything, its glass reflecting the city in a way that made everything look slightly softer, slightly more distant. I did not recognize it, but I understood it. This was not a place people stumbled into. This was a place people were brought to, or invited into, and I was not sure yet which one I was. Lucas stepped out beside me, the door closing behind him with the same quiet finality, and instantly the atmosphere shifted again, subtle but undeniable, like the space itself adjusted around his presence. A man near the entrance straightened slightly, his attention snapping into focus, but he did not approach, did not speak, just acknowledged with a nod that said everything without needing words. I noticed it. Of course I did. You could not miss something like that. You did not answer my question, I said, my voice calm but firm as I looked at Luca again, not letting the environment distract me from the one thing that still mattered. What is this place? His gaze followed mine briefly, taking in the building as if confirming something, then returned to me. Somewhere neutral, he said. For now. Neutral. The word felt intentional. Not safe. Not permanent. Just neutral. I nodded once, absorbing that, even if it did not fully explain anything. And what happens next? I asked. That was the real question. Not the building. Not the car. Not even the ring. What came after? Lucas studied me for a moment, like he was deciding how much to give me, how much I was ready for, how much I needed to hear right now versus what could wait. That depends, he said, on whether you want answers or distance. I frowned slightly, the choice not as simple as it sounded. Those feel like the same thing, I replied. He shook his head once. They are not, he said. Answers bring you closer. Distance keeps you where you were. I let that settle, my thoughts moving slowly, deliberately, not rushing to fill the silence the way I used to. Because I was starting to understand something. This was not a conversation I could rush. Not with him. Not with myself. And if I choose answers? I asked. His gaze held mine, steady, unwavering. Then you stop pretending tonight was an accident, he said. My breath caught slightly at that. Not because it scared me, but because it confirmed something I had already started to feel. This was not random. I looked away for a second, my eyes tracing the lines of the building, the quiet movement of the city around us. Everything continuing as if nothing had changed, even though everything had. My fingers brushed the ring again, slower this time, more aware, feeling its shape, its weight, its presence. You planned this, I said quietly. Not accusing, not emotional, just stating what I was starting to see. Luca did not react the way I expected. He did not deny it. He did not confirm it outright either. He simply watched me, like he was waiting for me to finish the thought on my own. You knew I would be there. I continued, my voice steady now, each piece falling into place one by one. You knew what was going to happen. A small pause. Then, finally, he spoke. I knew enough, he said. Again, the same phrase. But this time, it was different. This time, I understood what it meant. Not everything, but enough. Why? I asked, and this time the word carried more weight than anything I had said before. Because this was the question that mattered. Not the ring. Not the entrance. Not the shift in power back at the ballroom. Why me? Why tonight? Why him? Luca took a slow breath, not hesitating, but measuring, like he understood that this answer would change something, not just in the conversation, but in me. Because you were about to accept something that was never meant for you, he said. The words landed softly, but they stayed. I felt them settle somewhere deep, somewhere that had already started to recognize the truth of them before he ever said them out loud. And you think you were meant to stop it? I asked, my voice quieter now, not defensive, not challenging, just searching. He did not smile. He did not soften the answer. I do not think, he said. I act. There it was. Simple. Direct. Unapologetic. I exhaled slowly, my shoulders easing just slightly as I processed that, as I realized something else too. He had not asked me for permission, but he had given me a choice afterward. And that mattered more than I wanted to admit. I looked at him again, really looked, not just at the way he carried himself or the quiet authority that followed him everywhere, but at the way he spoke, the way he chose his words, the way he left space for me to decide what they meant. If I walk inside, I said slowly, this is not just about tonight anymore. It was not a question. It was a line. He nodded once. No, he agreed. It is not. Another pause. Not uncomfortable. Just full. Then, without rushing, without overthinking it, I took a step forward. Toward the entrance. Toward whatever this was. And this time, I did not look back. I crossed the threshold before I could second guess it, the glass doors sliding open without a sound, as if they had been expecting me, and the moment I stepped inside, the city faded into something distant, replaced by a quiet that felt deliberate, controlled, almost curated. The lobby stretched out in front of me, all clean lines and soft lighting, marble floors reflecting just enough to make every movement feel intentional, like nothing here was accidental, not even the air. My heels echoed faintly, each step measured, and for a second I became hyper-aware of myself again, of the dress I was still wearing, of the night I had not planned to leave behind, but somehow already had. Luca followed a step behind, not close enough to crowd me, not far enough to feel absent, just present in a way that seemed to anchor the entire space. A man behind the front desk looked up the moment we entered, his posture shifting instantly, recognition flickering across his face before settling into something more controlled. "Good evening," he said, but his eyes moved to Luca briefly, a silent acknowledgement passing between them that I could not decode but definitely noticed. Luca gave a small nod, nothing more, and that was enough. No names exchanged, no questions asked, just understanding. I slowed slightly, my gaze moving around the space, taking in details without fully meaning to. There were no crowds here, no noise, just a quiet kind of exclusivity that did not need to announce itself. "You come here often," I said, not really asking, just observing. Luca stepped beside me now, matching my pace again. "Only when it matters," he replied. The answer was simple, but it carried weight, like everything else he said. We moved toward the elevator, the soft hum of it arriving before we even pressed a button, doors opening as if timing itself had been arranged ahead of us. I hesitated for half a second before stepping inside, the enclosed space shifting the atmosphere again, making everything feel closer, more immediate. Luca entered after me, the doors sliding shut behind him, sealing us into a smaller world where there was no one else to distract from what was happening. The elevator began to move, smooth and silent, and I felt the subtle shift in my stomach as we ascended. I turned slightly, leaning back against the cool metal wall, my eyes finding his again. "You still have not told me what this is," I said, my voice steady, not demanding, but not letting go either. He looked at me, not avoiding the question, not deflecting, just considering. "This," he said slowly, "is where things become clear." Clear. The words sounded almost ironic given how little I actually understood. I let out a quiet breath, shaking my head slightly. "You keep saying things like that," I replied. "But clarity usually comes with explanations." A faint shift crossed his expression, not quite amusement, but close enough to recognize. "Explanations come when you ask the right questions," he said. I frowned slightly. "And what is the right question?" He did not answer immediately. The elevator continued its smooth ascent, the numbers above the door changing steadily, marking distance without revealing destination. Then, finally, he spoke. "Not what this is," he said, "but why you are here." That stopped me. Completely. Because it shifted everything. I had been focused on him. On his actions. On the situation. But not on myself. Not really. My gaze dropped briefly to the floor, my thoughts rearranging themselves, trying to follow the direction he had just pointed me toward. Why am I here? Not physically. Not literally. But truly. The answer was not simple. It was not clean. It was layered with everything that had happened before tonight, everything I had accepted, everything I had ignored. Because I did not want to stay there, I said after a moment, my voice quieter now, more honest than before. Luca nodded once, acknowledging it without interrupting. "That is part of it," he said. I looked back up at him, my brow furrowing slightly. "Part." He held my gaze, steady, unflinching. "You did not just leave a place," he said. "You walked away from a version of yourself that was willing to stay." The words landed deeper than I expected, cutting past the surface, settling somewhere I had not fully examined yet. I felt my chest tighten slightly, not from pain, but from recognition. Because he was right. It was not just about Daniel. It was not just about the humiliation. It was about what I had been willing to accept before it reached that point. The elevator slowed, the subtle shift signaling we had reached our floor before the doors even opened. When they did, the hallway beyond was quiet, softly lit, lined with doors that gave nothing away about what lay behind them. I stepped out slowly, my heels softer against the carpet now, the sound nearly disappearing completely. Luca followed, his presence filling the space without overwhelming it. He led the way down the hall, not rushing, not looking back to check if I was following, just certain that I would. And I did. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to see where this was going. He stopped in front of one of the doors, his hand lifting briefly to press a code into a panel I had not noticed at first glance. The door unlocked with a soft click, and he pushed it open, stepping aside slightly, not blocking the entrance, not pulling me in, just giving me the choice again. I paused at the threshold, the same hesitation from earlier returning, but different this time. Less about fear, more about awareness. Because I understood now that every step forward mattered. Every choice meant something. I glanced at him, just once. If I walk in, I said, my voice calm, grounded, I expect answers. He met my gaze without hesitation. Then ask, he said. Simple, direct, no conditions, no deflection, just an open door. I took a breath, then stepped inside. The door closed behind me with a soft click that felt louder than it should have, like the final note of a decision I could not take back. And for a second I just stood there, letting my eyes adjust, letting my mind catch up to the fact that I had stepped into a space that was nothing like the one I had just left. The room was not extravagant in the way I expected. It was not filled with obvious displays of wealth or unnecessary decoration. It was precise. Clean lines, warm lighting, floor-to-ceiling windows stretching across one wall, the city glowing beyond them like a distant constellation, close enough to see but far enough to feel separate. Everything had purpose here. Everything belonged. And for the first time that night, I felt slightly out of place again. Not small, not diminished, just aware. I took a few slow steps forward, my heels softer against the floor, the sound almost disappearing completely, and I let my gaze move across the room, taking in the details without rushing. A glass table, a single chair positioned just slightly off-center, a jacket folded neatly across the back of a sofa. Nothing cluttered, nothing chaotic. It felt like the opposite of everything I had just walked away from. Behind me, I heard Lucas step inside, the door closing with that same quiet certainty, and instantly the space shifted again, not because it changed, but because his presence made it feel more defined, more intentional. I turned to face him, my posture straightening slightly, not defensive, but grounded, because I had not come this far to stay silent now. You said to ask. I began, my voice steady, even if my thoughts were still catching up. So I will. He nodded once, simple, giving me the space without interrupting, without guiding the direction. Why me? I asked. Not where. Not what. Why? The question settled between us, heavier than anything else I had said so far, because this was the one that mattered. This was the one that had been building since the moment he said my name without being told. Luca did not answer immediately. He moved slightly into the room, not pacing, not avoiding, just repositioning, like he understood that distance and angle mattered in conversations like this. His gaze remained on me the entire time, steady, focused, like I was the only variable he was calculating. Because you were already standing at the edge, he said finally. The answer was not what I expected. Not direct, not simple, but not vague either. It meant something. I just had to find it. The edge of what? I asked, my brow tightening slightly as I tried to follow his logic. He stepped closer now, not enough to crowd me, but enough that I could feel the shift again, the subtle change in the air when he moved with intention. The moment before you stop accepting less than what you deserve, he said. My breath caught slightly at that, not because of how it sounded, but because of how it felt. Accurate. Too accurate. I looked away for a second, my gaze drifting toward the window, toward the city lights that suddenly felt like they belonged to a different life. You are making it sound like I needed saving, I said quietly, the words careful, because I needed to understand the difference between what he was offering and what I was not willing to accept. No, he replied immediately, and there was no hesitation in it, no room for misunderstanding. You needed interruption. That word settled. Deeper than anything else. Interruption. Not rescue. Not control. Not ownership. Just a break in something that would have continued if left alone. I turned back to him, studying his face, the way he held himself, the way he spoke without trying to convince me of anything, just presenting it and letting me decide what it meant. And you decided to be that interruption, I said. He did not deny it. Yes. Simple. Direct. No apology. No justification. Just truth. I let out a slow breath, my shoulders easing slightly as I processed that, as I realized something else too. He had not tried to take credit for anything. He had not framed himself as the reason I left. He had simply stepped in at the moment it mattered most. You still have not told me how you knew I would be there, I said, bringing the conversation back to the part that still did not make sense, the part that felt too precise to be coincidence. This time, he paused longer. Not because he did not have an answer, but because this one required more than a single sentence. Because I have been watching that situation for a while, he said finally. My chest tightened slightly at that, not from fear, but from the sudden awareness of how much I did not know. That situation, I repeated, my voice slower now, more deliberate. Or me. His gaze did not waver. You, he said. There was no hesitation, no attempt to soften it, just clarity. And for a second, the room felt smaller, not physically, but in the way information can close in around you when it changes your understanding of everything. How long? I asked. The question came out quieter than I intended, but it held anyway, steady enough to matter. He took a breath, measured, controlled, like he was deciding exactly how much truth to give me at once. Long enough to know you were about to say yes to something you should not have had to tolerate in the first place, he said. My mind moved quickly now, connecting pieces, replaying moments, conversations, things I had dismissed or ignored, wondering how much of my life had been visible to someone I had never noticed. That does not explain how, I said, my voice sharpening slightly, not aggressive, but focused. He nodded, acknowledging the gap. Your fiancé, he said, and even the word sounded different now, detached, like it no longer applied. He does business with people I keep track of. That answered part of it. Not everything, but enough to understand the connection. Enough to realize that my life had intersected with something far larger without me ever knowing. So I was what? I asked, searching for the right word, something that fit without diminishing what I had experienced. Collateral? He shook his head immediately. No, he said. You were overlooked. That hit harder than anything else. Because it was true in a way that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with the life I had been living. Overlooked. Dismissed. Accepted without being valued. I swallowed slowly, my thoughts shifting again, rearranging, settling into something new. And now? I asked, my voice quieter, but clearer than it had been all night. His gaze held mine, steady, unwavering. Now, he said, you are not. Silence followed that. Not empty, not uncertain, just real. And for the first time since I stepped into this room, I felt something settle inside me that had been restless for longer than I realized. Not because of him, not entirely, but because of what I was starting to see about myself, about what I had allowed, about what I was no longer willing to accept. I took a slow breath, my fingers brushing the ring again, not questioning it this time, just acknowledging it. Then tell me something else, I said, lifting my gaze back to his, steady, grounded, ready for whatever came next. What happens if I decide this interruption is not temporary? The question did not echo in the room, but it stayed there anyway, hanging between us like something that refused to be ignored. And for the first time since I had met him, Luca did not answer right away, not because he did not have one, but because this one mattered in a different way. I could see it in the way his gaze held mine, steady but sharper now, like he was recalculating something, not about the situation, but about me. Then it stops being an interruption, he said finally, his voice lower, more deliberate, and starts becoming a direction. The words settled into me slowly, not rushed, not forced, just there, waiting to be understood. I shifted my weight slightly, my fingers brushing the edge of the table beside me, grounding myself in something physical while everything else felt abstract, layered, complex. Direction implies choice, I said, my voice steady, but softer now, less guarded, because I was no longer asking from a place of defense, but from understanding. It does, he replied. And consequence. That word tightened something in my chest, not fear exactly, but awareness, because consequences meant this was not just about tonight, not just about reclaiming a moment or walking away from something broken. It meant continuation. It meant change that would not reverse itself easily. I took a slow breath, letting it out carefully, my eyes drifting briefly to the window again, to the city that kept moving no matter what decisions I made inside this room. And what kind of consequences are we talking about? I asked. This time, there was no pause. The kind that do not fit back into the life you had before, he said. Direct, unfiltered, honest in a way that did not try to make it easier to accept. I turned back to him, studying his face, searching for anything that suggested exaggeration or manipulation, but there was nothing like that there. Just certainty. So this is not just about me walking away from him, I said slowly, more to confirm than to question. No, Luca replied. It never was. Silence followed that, heavier now, filled with everything I was beginning to see but had not fully processed yet. My life, as I knew it, had not just been disrupted tonight. It had been redirected. And not gently, not gradually, suddenly, intentionally. I crossed my arms loosely, not defensive, just containing the shift that was happening inside me. The realization that this was no longer about a single moment of humiliation or a single act of defiance. It was something bigger. Then what is it about? I asked. He took a step closer, not enough to invade my space, but enough to make the distance feel more deliberate, more controlled. It is about you not going back to something that was already closing in on you, he said. My brow furrowed slightly. Closing in. He nodded once. You think tonight was the worst version of that situation, he continued. It was not. It was just the first time it became visible. That hit differently. Because it suggested something I had not fully allowed myself to consider. That what happened tonight was not an isolated event. It was a pattern. A trajectory. Something that would have continued, possibly in ways I had not yet experienced. I looked down for a second, my thoughts moving faster now, replaying moments, conversations, the subtle things I had dismissed, the things I had explained away because they were easier to ignore than confront. And you saw that, I said quietly. Yes. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Just confirmation. I let out a slow breath, my shoulders dropping slightly as I processed that, as I felt something inside me shift again, not breaking, but realigning. So what? I said, lifting my gaze back to his, steadier now, clearer. You step in, change the outcome, and now what? I just follow this direction you were talking about. There was a faint change in his expression then, not amusement, but something close to it, like he recognized the assumption and was about to correct it. No, he said. You define it. That stopped me. Completely. Because it removed something I had been bracing against without even realizing it. The idea that this was his path, and I was just stepping into it. Then what are you doing? I asked, the question sharper now, more focused. If this is my direction, where do you fit into it? He held my gaze, steady, unwavering, and for the first time, there was something else there. Not control, not calculation, something quieter, something intentional. I am making sure you have the space to choose it without interference, he said. The answer was not what I expected. It was not ownership. It was not demand. It was protection of possibility. And somehow, that felt more dangerous than anything else, because it meant the responsibility shifted entirely back to me. And what do you get out of that? I asked, because nothing about him suggested he did anything without purpose. Another pause. Not long. Just enough to mark the weight of the answer. Clarity, he said. I frowned slightly. About what? His gaze did not waver. About whether you will choose differently when you are no longer being pressured to stay the same. The words landed with a quiet intensity that I could not ignore, because they were not about him. They were about me. About my patterns. About my decisions. About what I would do when. The environment changed, but I remained the same person. Or did not. I felt my pulse shift slightly, not racing, but stronger, more present, like something inside me had woken up and was paying attention now. And if I do not? I asked. His answer came just as steady as everything else. Then you walk away, he said. Simple. No consequences attached. No pressure. Just an option. That surprised me more than anything else. Because I expected stakes. I expected conditions. But he was not offering either. He was offering a choice. A real one. I looked at him for a long moment, studying everything I could see, everything I could not, trying to understand the boundaries of what he was offering without trying to define it too quickly. You do not make this easy, I said finally. A faint shift crossed his expression, almost like acknowledgement. It is not supposed to be easy, he replied. It is supposed to be real. That settled into me in a way that nothing else had tonight, because it stripped away the illusion of simplicity, the idea that there was a right answer or an obvious path. There was not. There was only choice. I exhaled slowly, my fingers brushing the ring again, not as a question this time, but as a reminder, a marker of the moment everything changed. Then here is what I know, I said, my voice steady, grounded, clear in a way it had not been before. I am not going back to who I was. His gaze sharpened slightly, not in challenge, but in focus. Good, he said quietly. I held his eyes, not looking away, not stepping back. But I am also not stepping into something without understanding it. I continued. So if this is a direction, then I choose how fast I walk it. A brief silence followed. And then, finally, something shifted in his expression, subtle but unmistakable. Approval. Not of control. Not of compliance. But of clarity. Then walk, he said. And this time, it felt like I already had. The word lingered in the air after he said it. Simple, direct, but it did not feel like a command. It felt like permission, and that was what made it different from anything I had experienced before. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle, letting my own heartbeat slow into something. Steady instead of reactive, because for the first time that night, I was not responding to something happening to me. I was deciding what happened next. I moved first. Not far. Just a step toward the window, drawn by the city lights that stretched endlessly beyond the glass. Each building glowing with lives I did not know, choices I did not see. And for a second, I wondered how many people out there were standing at the same kind of edge without even realizing it. My reflection stared back at me, faint against the brightness outside. The woman in the glass, both familiar and completely new at the same time. The dress was the same. The face was the same. But something behind my eyes had shifted, something quieter but stronger, like I had finally stepped into a version of myself that had been waiting for me to catch up. You said I defined the direction, I said, my voice calm as I kept my gaze on the reflection instead of turning back to him. So let me be clear about something. I paused, not for effect, but because I wanted the words to land exactly where I meant them to. I do not follow people, I continued. I do not replace one situation where I am overlooked with another where I am just repositioned. The last word felt deliberate, like I was testing it, making sure it did not quietly turn into something I had already left behind. Behind me, I heard a soft shift, not movement exactly, just the subtle sound of attention sharpening, and I knew without looking that he was listening carefully. Good, Lucas said after a moment, his voice steady, unchanged, but there was something in it now, something that sounded like agreement instead of redirection. I turned then, slowly, meeting his gaze again, holding it this time without hesitation. Then we understand each other, I said. Because whatever this is, it only works if I am standing in it by choice. He did not step closer. He did not try to close the distance. He simply held my gaze, and for a second, the entire room seemed to narrow down to that single point of connection, that single understanding being built without force. Then stand, he replied. No pressure, no expectation, just acknowledgement. I let out a quiet breath, something inside me settling more. Firmly now, not perfectly, but enough to move forward without feeling like I was losing myself in the process. Then I have another question, I said, shifting slightly, not breaking the moment, but building on it. If this is about me choosing differently, what exactly am I choosing between? His eyes did not leave mine. Between comfort and clarity, he said. The answer came without hesitation, like he had already thought through this part long before I asked it. I frowned slightly, not because I did not understand, but because I wanted to understand more precisely. Explain, I said. He nodded once, as if he expected that. Comfort is what you had, he said. Predictable. Familiar. Easy to stay in, even when it was not right. My mind immediately went back to the life I had been living, the routines, the expectations, the way I had adjusted myself to fit something that never fully fit me. And clarity? I asked. Clarity is what you have now, he replied. Uncertain, unfamiliar, but honest. The words settled differently than I expected, not as a warning, but as a framework, something I could actually see, something I could measure against what I had known before. I crossed my arms loosely again, not defensive, just grounding myself in the conversation, in the choices being laid out in front of me. And you think I would choose clarity? I said, watching him carefully. You already did, he replied. That stopped me, because he was right. I had already stepped out of the ballroom. I had already gotten into the car. I had already walked through the door. Each step had been a choice, even if I had not fully labeled it as one at the time. That does not mean I know what comes with it, I said quietly. No, he agreed. But it means you are willing to find out. I let that sit for a moment, my thoughts moving through everything that had happened, everything that had changed, the way the night had unfolded in a way I could not have predicted, but somehow felt necessary. And where do you fit into that? I asked again, not letting that part go, because it still mattered. He held my gaze, steady, unflinching. I am not the direction, he said. I am part of the environment. That answer was unexpected. It was not ownership. It was not distance either. It was something in between. Something that suggested influence without control. That sounds very intentional, I said. It is, he replied simply. I studied him for a second longer, trying to understand the boundaries of what he was offering, what he was not, where the line existed between involvement and interference. So you are not asking me to stay, I said. No, he answered. And you are not expecting me to leave? I continued. No. The consistency of it was almost disarming. The lack of pressure, the absence of expectation, because it meant the responsibility of this entire situation rested on me and me alone. I exhaled slowly, my fingers brushing the ring again, feeling its presence without questioning it this time, just acknowledging that it was part of the moment, not the definition of it. Then here is what I choose, I said, my voice steady, clear, grounded in a way that felt new but right. I choose to stay long enough to understand what this actually is. His gaze sharpened slightly, not in challenge, but in focus. And after that, he asked. I held his eyes, not looking away. Then I decide if it is something I continue, I said. A brief silence followed. And then, finally, he nodded once, a small, controlled movement that carried more weight than anything else. That is enough, he said. And for the first time since this began, it felt like it actually was. The word enough settled between us, but it did not close anything. It opened something instead, a space where expectation did not exist yet, but possibility did. And for the first time since I stepped into this room, I felt the shift completely, not just in the situation, but in myself. I moved away from the window slowly, not retreating, not advancing, just repositioning, taking ownership of the space in a way that felt subtle but real. The room no longer felt unfamiliar. It felt neutral, just like he had said earlier. A place where something could begin without forcing it into a shape too quickly. Then we start with clarity, I said, my voice steady, no hesitation this time. Real clarity. Luca watched me, not interrupting, not redirecting, just present. Then ask, he replied again. And there was something different in the way he said it now, not just permission, but readiness. I nodded once, grounding myself before I spoke again. You said you have been watching the situation, I began. That means you knew more than just what happened tonight. He did not deny it. Yes. Then tell me what I did not see. I said. That was the real question. Not what he did, not why he stepped in, but what I had missed, what I had overlooked in my own life. There was a pause, not hesitation, but selection, like he was deciding where to begin rather than whether to answer. You adjusted too often, he said finally. The words were simple, but they landed with precision. I frowned slightly, not rejecting it, but needing to understand it more fully. Adjusted how? I asked. He stepped slightly to the side, his movement calm, measured, as if the position itself mattered less than the clarity of the conversation. You made yourself easier to keep, he said. My breath caught for a second, not because the words were harsh, but because they were accurate in a way that was difficult to ignore. I felt it immediately, the recognition, the quiet truth behind it that I had never said out loud. You compromised your expectations to maintain stability, he continued. You accepted explanations that did not align with your instincts because they were easier than confrontation. Each sentence landed carefully, not overwhelming, not rushed, just building. I looked away for a second, my gaze dropping to the floor, not out of avoidance, but because I needed to process it without distraction. Images flashed through my mind, moments I had brushed off, conversations I had softened, decisions I had justified because they felt easier than standing firm. And you think that would have continued? I said quietly. I know it would have, he replied. No hesitation. No doubt. Just certainty. I exhaled slowly, my shoulders easing slightly as I let that settle, as I allowed myself to acknowledge something I had not fully admitted before. It was not just that Daniel had humiliated me. It was that I had slowly allowed the conditions that made that possible. So tonight was not the beginning, I said. No, Luca replied. It was the exposure. The word hit differently. Exposure. Not creation. Not escalation. Just revelation. I nodded slightly, more to myself than to him, feeling the shift inside me become more defined, more structured, like something that had been vague was now taking shape. Then what about you? I asked, lifting my gaze back to his. If I am supposed to understand this clearly, then I need to understand you clearly too. He did not react defensively. He did not deflect. He simply waited, giving me the space to finish the question the way I needed to. You do not just watch situations, I continued. You act on them. You intervene. That is not neutral. A faint shift crossed his expression, not disagreement, but acknowledgement. No, he said. It is not. I stepped a little closer, not closing the distance completely, but enough to make the conversation feel more direct, more intentional. So what made you decide I was worth intervening in? I asked. The question was not emotional. It was not defensive. It was precise. And it mattered. Luca held my gaze, steady, unflinching, and for the first time, there was something else there, something that felt less calculated and more deliberate in a different way. Because you were not passive, he said. I blinked slightly, surprised by the answer. You did not create conflict, he continued. But you did not avoid truth either. You noticed things. You questioned them. You just stopped short of acting on it. I felt that one deeper than the others, because it was not criticism, it was observation, and it reflected something I had always known about myself, but had never fully trusted. You were already moving, he added. You just needed a moment that forced the decision. Silence followed that, but it was not heavy. It was clarifying. Like pieces were aligning into something I could finally see without distortion. I took a slow breath, my hand resting lightly against the table now, not gripping it, just present. So you created that moment, I said. He did not deny it. I allowed it to happen in a way that could not be ignored, he corrected. That distinction mattered. More than I expected. I nodded once, acknowledging it, even if I was still processing everything that came with it. And now? I asked. Now you are here, he said. Simple, direct, but incomplete. I held his gaze, not letting the conversation settle into something comfortable too quickly. And you? I pressed. What do you do now that I am here? This time, he paused longer. Not because he did not have an answer, but because this one required precision. Now, he said slowly, I do not interfere unless you ask. The words settled differently than everything else he had said so far. They were not about control. They were not about direction. They were about restraint. I studied him for a second longer, searching for any sign that this was conditional, that there was something unspoken attached to it. But there was nothing, just clarity. So this is where you step back, I said. Yes. And let me figure it out, I continued. Yes. I let out a quiet breath, feeling the weight of that, not as pressure, but as responsibility. Because this was entirely mine now. Then I will, I said, my voice steady, grounded, clear in a way that felt new but right. He nodded once, not approving, not directing, just acknowledging. And in that moment, I understood something else. He had not just changed the situation. He had changed the way I saw myself in it. And that was what mattered most. Responsibility settled differently than fear ever had. It did not press down on me. It steadied me, like something finally aligned instead of pulling in opposite directions. And for a moment, I just stood there, letting that feeling exist without rushing to define it. Because that was the difference now. I was not reacting anymore. I was choosing. I moved again, slower this time, circling slightly around the room. Not pacing, just understanding the space I was in, the way everything had intention, the way nothing was wasted or excessive, and I realized something subtle but important. This place did not overwhelm, it focused. I stopped near the table, resting my fingertips lightly against its surface, cool and smooth, grounding, real, and I looked at Luca again, not searching this time, just seeing. Then I need to understand what I am stepping into, I said, my voice calm, not urgent, but clear, because if this was mine to decide, then I needed the full picture, not fragments. He did not move, but his attention sharpened slightly, like he recognized the shift in the question. You are stepping into something that does not adjust to keep you comfortable, he said. I let out a small breath, almost a quiet laugh, not because it was amusing, but because it was honest in a way that felt almost relieving. That already sounds different, I replied. He nodded once. It is, he said. Comfort is often the thing that keeps people where they do not belong. I leaned slightly against the table now, not heavily, just enough to anchor myself as I processed that. And what replaces it? I asked. Clarity, he said again, but this time the word carried more weight, more definition, like it had been built on everything we had already discussed. I tilted my head slightly, studying him. Clarity is not always easy to live with, I said. No, he agreed. But it is easier than pretending not to see what is already there. That landed deeper than I expected, because it connected everything, the past, the present, the choice I had already made to walk out instead of staying silent. I nodded slowly, feeling that truth settle into place. Then I do not want comfort, I said quietly. I want to see clearly. His gaze held mine, steady, and there was something in it now, not approval, not validation, just recognition. Then you will, he said. Silence followed, but it was not empty. It was structured, like the conversation had shifted from questioning into something more defined, something that had direction now even if it was still unfolding. I straightened slightly, pushing myself away from the table, my posture more grounded, more certain than it had been before. Then here is the next part one need to understand, I said. If you step back unless I ask, then what does that look like? He did not hesitate. It looks like I do not make decisions for you, he said. I do not guide outcomes unless you choose to involve me. I considered that for a moment, letting it settle, measuring it against everything else. And if I do not? I asked. Then you move through this without interference, he replied. Simple, direct, no pressure. I nodded slowly, absorbing that. That means I am responsible for everything that comes next, I said. Yes. The certainty in his voice did not waver. I let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of that, not as something heavy, but as something solid, something I could actually hold. Good, I said after a moment. The word surprised even me, but it felt right. Because for the first time, responsibility did not feel like something placed on me. It felt like something returned to me. Luca watched me carefully now, not evaluating, not calculating, just observing the shift as it happened. Then I have one more question, I said, lifting my gaze back to his. And this one matters. He nodded once. Ask. I took a breath, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted the question to be exact. What happens outside this room? I asked. That was the part that still needed clarity. This space was controlled, neutral, defined, but the world beyond it was not. He did not answer immediately, not because he did not have an answer, but because this one extended beyond the immediate moment. Outside this room, he said slowly, things do not move as cleanly. I frowned slightly, meaning, he stepped a fraction closer, not enough to change the distance significantly, but enough to make the conversation feel more direct again. Meaning the same patterns that existed before still exist, he said. The difference is you are no longer participating in them the same way. That made sense. It aligned with everything else. But it also raised another question. And the people in those patterns? I asked. His gaze remained steady. They will respond to that change, he said. Not always in ways that align with your clarity. I let that settle, not surprised, but acknowledging the reality of it. Because change was never isolated. It always affected everything connected to it. So this is not just about me, I said. It never is, he replied. I nodded slowly, understanding that more fully now. Then I need to be prepared for that, I said. Yes. No hesitation. No reassurance. Just truth. I exhaled, feeling the final pieces of this conversation settle into place, not complete, but structured enough to move forward. Then here is what I will do, I said, my voice steady, grounded, clear. I will not go back to what I left. I will not ignore what I see now. And I will not make decisions out of fear of change. His gaze sharpened slightly, not in challenge, but in focus, like he recognized the weight of what I had just said. Good, he said quietly. I held his eyes, not looking away. But I will also not rush into something just because it is different, I added. I will understand it first. A brief pause. Then he nodded once. Then you are already moving correctly, he said. And for the first time, that did not feel like guidance. It felt like confirmation of something I had already decided. I let out a slow breath, my fingers brushing the ring again, not questioning it, not analyzing it, just acknowledging it as part of the moment, not the definition of it. Then I think we are clear, I said. He held my gaze for a second longer, then gave a small, controlled nod. We are, he replied. And for the first time since this night began, clarity did not feel like something I was searching for. It felt like something I was standing in. Clarity did not feel loud. It did not arrive with certainty or certainty's illusion. It settled quietly, like something that had always been there but had finally been acknowledged. And as I stood there facing Luca, I realized the room had changed again, not physically, but in how I occupied it. I was no longer measuring my words. I was choosing them. I was no longer reacting to his presence. I was standing within it without losing my own. I took a slow breath, letting it out evenly, my gaze drifting once more toward the window. But this time I did not look at the city as something distant. I looked at it as something I would step back into differently. Then there is one more thing I need to do, I said, my voice calm, grounded in a way that felt unfamiliar but right. Luca did not interrupt. He did not ask what. He simply watched, allowing the moment to unfold without trying to shape it. That, more than anything, told me he understood what this next step meant. I reached for my phone slowly, not out of urgency, but with intention, the movement deliberate, controlled. The screen lit up in my hand, the familiar interface suddenly feeling different, like it belonged to a version of me that had not fully caught up to where I was standing now. Messages, missed calls, notifications stacked on top of each other like echoes from a life that was already starting to feel distant. His name was there. Daniel. Repeated. Persistent. I stared at it for a second, not with anger, not with hurt, but with clarity. Just like Luca had said. I tapped the screen. The message thread opened instantly, filled with words that would have meant something to me hours ago. Apologies that came too quickly. Explanations that tried to reshape what had already been revealed. Questions that were not really questions, just attempts to regain control of something he had already lost. I read them without reacting, without letting them pull me back into something I had already stepped out of. For the first time, I saw them for what they were. Not solutions, not accountability, just patterns. I felt Luca's presence behind me, not close enough to intrude, not distant enough to disappear, just there, steady, unchanged, like a constant I did not have to question. You do not have to do that now, he said quietly. Not stopping me, not discouraging me, just acknowledging the weight of the moment. I shook my head slightly, my thumb hovering over the screen. No, I said. I do, because this was not about him anymore. This was about me finishing something the right way. Not emotionally, not reactively, clearly. I opened the message field, the cursor blinking steadily, waiting, patient in a way that felt almost symbolic. I did not rush. I did not type immediately. I let myself think, not about what I felt, but about what was true. That was the difference now. And then, slowly, I began to type. Not long, not complicated, just enough, just clear, just final. I paused for a second after finishing, reading it once, making sure it said exactly what I meant, nothing more, nothing less. Then I pressed send. The message disappeared from the draft box, replaced by something simple. Delivered. No hesitation. No second guessing. Just done. I lowered the phone slightly, exhaling slowly, and for a moment, I expected something. A reaction. A feeling. Regret. Relief. Something dramatic to mark the end of something that had once defined so much of my life. But there was nothing like that. Just quiet. Not empty. Not hollow. Just clear. I set the phone down on the table beside me, not looking at it again, because I did not need to. That part was finished. I turned back toward Luca, meeting his gaze again, steady, grounded, different than before, not because he had changed, but because I had. That was the last part of what I needed to close, I said. He nodded once, not asking what I had written, not needing to know the details, just understanding the significance of it. Good, he replied. I studied him for a second, noticing something I had not fully registered before. He did not step forward after that. He did not fill the space with more words. He let it exist. He let me exist within it. And that mattered more than anything else he could have said. I moved slightly, stepping away from the table, the room feeling different now, not unfamiliar, not neutral, but available. Like something could actually begin here without being forced into place. So this is where it shifts, I said quietly. From ending something to starting something. He held my gaze, steady, precise. Yes. Simple, but final in a way that marked a transition, not just in the situation, but in me. I nodded once, not because I needed confirmation, but because I recognized it. Because I felt it. The difference between reacting and choosing, between staying and stepping forward, between being defined by something and defining it myself. I glanced briefly at the window again, at the city that no longer felt like something I was outside of, but something I would step back into with a different understanding, a different presence. Then I looked back at him. Then I am not here by accident, I said. It was not a question. It was a realization. He did not hesitate. No, he replied. I held his gaze for a moment longer, letting that settle fully, not as something overwhelming, but as something intentional. And then, for the first time since this all began, I allowed myself a small, quiet certainty. Good, I said, because for the first time, I meant it. Then do not treat it like coincidence, he said. And the words did not feel like guidance. They felt like a mirror, reflecting something I had already begun to understand but had not fully claimed yet. I stood there, steady, aware of everything that had led to this exact moment. The choices, the interruptions, the clarity that had replaced confusion piece by piece, and for the first time, I did not feel like I was catching up to my own life. I felt like I was finally standing in it. The room was quiet, but not empty, the city beyond the glass still moving, still alive, but it no longer pulled at me the same way. It did not feel like something I had to return to. It felt like something I would re-enter differently. I moved slowly, not out of hesitation, but with intention, taking a few steps closer to the window, my reflection clearer now, not blurred by doubt, not fractured by expectation. Just me. The same face. The same presence. But something behind it had changed. Something steadier. Something that did not need to ask for permission to exist the way it was. You changed the outcome, I said quietly, my voice calm, not questioning, just acknowledging. Behind me, Luca did not move immediately. I could feel his attention shift, not sharper, but more focused, like this part of the conversation mattered in a different way. No, he replied. You did. I turned slightly, meeting his gaze again, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Because that answer, it reframed everything. It removed him from the center of the moment and placed me there instead. It made the ring, the interruption, the decision mine. You created the moment, I said. But I chose it. Yes. Simple. Clear. Undeniable. I let out a slow breath, feeling that settle fully, not as something overwhelming, but as something grounding. Because it meant this was not something that happened to me. It was something I stepped into. Something I accepted. Something I defined. I moved again, this time not toward the window, but toward the center of the room, the space feeling different now, not neutral, not unfamiliar, but open. Like it was no longer waiting for something to happen. It was waiting for me to decide what happened next. Then this is where it becomes real, I said. Not a question, not a statement, just truth. Luca watched me, his posture unchanged, his presence steady, but there was something in his gaze now, something quieter, less calculated, more observant. It already is, he said. I shook my head slightly, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching the edge of my expression, not from amusement, but from recognition. No, I said. Before this, it was a reaction. I held his gaze, steady, certain. Now it is a choice. Silence followed, but it was not empty. It was complete. Like the conversation had reached a point where words were no longer needed to define what was already understood. I lifted my hand slightly, looking at the ring again, not questioning it, not analyzing it, just acknowledging it for what it was. Not ownership, not obligation, just a marker, a moment where everything shifted. This does not define me, I said quietly. Luca did not interrupt. He did not correct. He simply listened. But it reminds me of the moment I stopped letting other people define me. I continued. His gaze held mine, steady, unwavering, and for a brief second, there was something there that had not been there before. Not control, not distance, something closer to respect. Then keep it, he said. I tilted my head slightly, studying him. Not because of you, I clarified. Because of what it represents. He nodded once. That is the only reason it should remain, he replied. I let that settle, my fingers lowering slowly, the weight of the ring no longer unfamiliar, no longer unexpected, just present. I turned my attention back to him fully now, no hesitation, no distance. So this is where we define terms, I said, my voice steady, grounded in a way that felt completely my own. Not conditions, not expectations. Terms. He did not react with surprise. He did not resist. He simply inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the shift. "Go on," he said. I took a breath, not because I needed time, but because I wanted clarity in what I was about to say. "I do not belong to you," I said first. The words were calm, not defensive, not aggressive, just clear. "No," he agreed immediately. No hesitation. No challenge. That mattered. I continued. "You do not make decisions for me," I added. "No," he repeated. Still steady. Still consistent. I nodded slightly, the structure of it forming, not rigid, but defined. "And whatever this becomes," I said, "it happens because I choose it. Not because you stepped in. Not because of what happened tonight. Because I decided is worth continuing." He held my gaze, and for the first time, there was something unmistakable in his expression. Approval. Not of control. Not of outcome. Of clarity. "Then it will only continue if it is real," he said. I let out a slow breath, feeling that land exactly where it needed to. "Good," I replied, because that was the only way I wanted it. I stepped back slightly, not creating distance, just shifting the space between us into something that felt balanced instead of undefined. The room no longer felt like a place I had entered. It felt like a place I could leave without losing anything I had gained. "Then here is what happens next," I said. His attention remained steady, focused, but not pressing. "I leave," I continued. "Not because I am walking away from this, but because I am walking back into my life with a different understanding of it." A small pause. Then, softer, but no less certain, "And if this has a place in it, I will decide where." Silence followed, but it was not tension. It was agreement without needing to be spoken. Luca nodded once, a small, controlled movement that carried more weight than anything else he could have said. "Then go," he said. No resistance. No attempt to hold the moment longer than it needed to exist. Just acceptance. I turned toward the door, my steps steady, my posture grounded, not rushing, not hesitating. Each movement felt intentional, like I was no longer reacting to the path in front of me. I was creating it. My hand reached the handle, pausing there for just a second, not out of doubt, but out of awareness. I glanced back once, meeting his gaze one last time, not for confirmation, not for permission, just acknowledgement. And then I opened the door. The hallway beyond was quiet, the same soft lighting, the same calm structure, but it felt different now. Because I was different. I stepped out, the door closing behind me with a soft, final click, and as I walked forward, I realized something I had not fully understood until now. He ruled his world. But tonight, I chose mine.